happy.
No.
They're there to like go, shit, next time I go down that street, I better be a bit slower.
But I think also the story was telling us that it was every which way was an inconvenience for the neighbours. People were slowing down and then accelerating. That's also creating an element of noise as well. So it's every way in which everyone approaches the speed bump can cause a noise issue for them.
Is this just a life lesson in be careful what you wish for? I think your community might need to be rethinking
I'm rethinking. I mean, I was sort of very much pro speed bumps, but reading this, I'm actually not quite so sure. Someone says, "Oh, I'm a Fijoa fiend. I'm a foreign Fijoa fiend. I wasn't born in New Zealand, but I love Fijoas. I eat the skin as well." Wallace, Tim from Blenheim here. I drive down this road quite regularly, and I think the complaints are mostly from it.
Oh, maybe don't read that one.
No, just from inadequate drivers. Hence the need for speed bumps. So there you go. Finally, I want to get onto this. It's very interesting, this one. This will make you cringe, or maybe not. A Fox News host has revealed that he hasn't washed his hands in, get this, 10 years. Yep. The reason he doesn't believe germs are a real thing. Pete Hegseth says, quote, "I can't see them, therefore they aren't real." Now, the admission came out when he was discussing eating Dale pizza that hadn't been in the fridge on the show, Fox and Friends. He obviously didn't see a problem with it. He's sent mixed messages on Twitter since, one implying that he was joking, the other slamming the media for being outraged. Interestingly, Fox and Friends is President Trump's favourite show on Fox, who's a well-known germaphobe. So I wonder whether he'd be up for shaking Pete's hands now. But what do you guys think? Does he have a point, James? If you can't see germs, are they...
What was frightening is this guy was apparently being considered for the boss of Veteran Affairs, the Secretary of Veteran Affairs in the States.
You'd have to do so much handshaking.
Well, yeah.
I imagine you would. Quite a big part of the job.
My son has just started a building apprenticeship over the summer holidays, and it was interesting. This night he came home and he was talking about the fact of the hygiene elements on site and people not wanting to get sick. So they actually there's health and safety in the work environment as well, but they actually take their hygiene quite seriously because none of them want to get sick and be off work, and particularly around how they deal with their food. So I was really pleased to hear that. So he was talking about wanting to make sure that he brought antibacterial soap when he went to work so that he could keep his hands clean before they ate. I thought that was a really good thing.
Yeah. I suppose the other issue here, Carlo, is the denial of scientific facts. That's nothing new to Fox. I mean, media...
That's fake news. Germs are fake news.
I mean, Media Matters, the watchdog group, said that, quote, Fox News hosts tended to discuss climate change mainly when the weather was cold, seeking to cast doubt on science regarding rising global temperatures. So in the modern media environment, it seems that facts matter little. Is that also part of it, do you think, Carlo?
Potentially a contagious thing across the which is a terrible, terrible pun. Sorry. Oh,
well done.
But it does fit that paradigm of anti-intellectualism, anti-science, anti-knowledge. I mean, it's a humorous one at place, but there is that core of that that's really quite alarming, that we can dismiss given facts, known knowns, if you like to use the Rumfeld thing, is convenient. This guy apparently also served in Iraq as well, clearly not looking for the biological weapons.
He is a biological weapon, that's the problem.
Someone, an email here, does he use his argument for other things, such as God? Presumably he is Christian, as he's on Fox. Carlo, you've been wonderful. Thank you for coming again. First time ever on the panel. And James Elliott, you can if you wanted to as well. No, good on you both. James Elliott, Carlo Miller. Wonderful show. And see you tomorrow. We'll do it all again from 3:45. Bye.
Thank you.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, the lawyer for serial rapist Malcolm Rewa accuses Susan Burdett's son of killing his own mother for money. How much would you pay to stay alive for a few extra months? Terminal cancer patients say they're being denied new life-extending cancer drugs because they don't fit Pharmac's cost-benefit ratio. We ask Health Minister David Clark whether he'll order a review of the drug funding agency. And do the numbers mean this is sounding more and more likely?
I'm Judith Collins. I'm the leader of the National Party.
Judith Collins is live, and Ma'anonu explains why he wants to be in All Black again. Check us out on Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. No mai haere mai. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. The lawyer for Malcolm Rewa has accused Susan Burdett's son of killing his mother for his inheritance. Rewa is on trial in the High Court at Auckland, charged with murdering Ms Burdett in her Papatoetoe home nearly 27 years ago. Ms Burdett's son, Dallas Mackay, told the jury he was at his whangarei home the night she died. Rewa's lawyer, Paul Chambers, said he had ample opportunity to murder her and much to gain from his mother's death, including $250,000 through her life insurance policy. Mr Mackay said he did not murder his mother and told the court he first heard about her death on the radio.
What was the news article about?
A 39-year-old woman living alone in Papatoetoe had been found bludgeoned to death.
Did you think of Susan Burdett?
Yeah, and I thought, nah, can't be. Wouldn't be. Couldn't possibly be.
Susan Burdett's son, Dallas Mackay. A helicopter will take to the air about an hour with specialists to assess the properties of people in the 4 valleys affected by the Tasman fire. About an hour ago, evacuees were told they would not be able to return home tonight, and restricted access only is to continue. The Civil Defence Group Controller Jim Frater says for the last several days, residents Teapot, Eves, Redwood and Pigeon Valleys have been able to get access for a few hours a day to tend to their animals. He says a large team is working on the same kind of conditional re-entry for them that Wakefield residents got yesterday. But he says this is a much more complex process as properties in the 4 valleys have all been affected by the fire, either directly or by its proximity.
Specialist teams will be beginning the risk assessment checks for each property. There are about 200 properties to look at individually, so it will take some time. We've got a helicopter going up at 5 with specialists involved in it, and that will speed up the process, we hope.
Jim Frater there of Civil Defence. A man who's had a murder charge against him dropped says he can now rebuild his life without the accusation hanging over him. The trial of Paddy Woods was due to start today at the High Court at Wellington. He was accused of strangling Zena Campbell in a car in Wellington's Aro Valley early last year. However, the murder charge was dismissed after a pathologist showed while there was evidence of pressure on Ms Campbell's neck, it was not likely to have been severe enough to cause her death. Mr Wood's lawyer, Kevin Preston, says his client has consistently maintained his innocence.
And today, the ruling of His Honour Justice Collins has finally drawn a line under what has doubtless been a traumatic and trying time for Mr Woods and, of course, for the family and friends of Zenith Campbell.
Kevin Preston says his client lost his liberty, his job, and had his personal life scrutinised. Negotiators in the US Congress say they've reached a tentative deal on border security funding that would avoid a looming government shutdown. Republican Senator Richard Shelby told reporters that staff were now feverishly putting together all the details. The news came as the President, Donald Trump, addressed a campaign-style rally in the border city of El Paso, Texas.
So we probably have some good news, but who knows? Who knows? We're setting the stage, folks. You know what it's called, right? It's called We're Setting the Stage. We're setting the table. We're doing whatever we have to do. The wall's being built. It'll continue. It's going at a rapid pace.
Donald Trump. No details of the new deal have been released, and it's unclear whether Mr Trump will get any money for his border wall or whether he'll endorse the agreement. Meanwhile, Simon Bridges says he's confident in his leadership and his team as he heads into a new parliamentary term. On the eve of the first sitting session for 2019, National slipped below Labour for the first time in more than a decade in the News Hub Reid Research poll. Mr Bridges also polled below one of his MPs, Judith Collins, who ran against him in the leadership contest last year in the preferred Prime Minister stakes. He was asked how this poll could impact his leadership.
I'm very confident and comfortable in my leadership. It's a party vote that matters. That's jumping around, but the truth of that is you've got right now a party in opposition that's polling as high as any other I can think of halfway through a new term.
The National leader Simon Bridges. The Prime Minister has opened Parliament this afternoon reflecting on her summer, talking about her baby and the government's goals. Jacinda Ardern reiterated what she said at Waitangi, saying there is much more to do for the country and she plans to deliver in 2019. She talked of leading, not just governing, saying the previous government sat idle and merely did the latter.
That does mean doing things differently. It does mean taking risks. But if that benefits more New Zealanders, if that reduces inequality, if it gets people housed and it gives jobs in the region, those are risks worth taking.
Jacinda Ardern. Nationals leader Simon Bridges used his speech to point out where the government isn't delivering on its promises, such as the Kiwi Build program. It's 6 minutes past 5. On to sport now. 3 years after playing his last test for the All Blacks, midfielder Ma'a Nonu wants back in black. The 36-year-old two-time World Cup winner is back playing for the Blues after 3 years with French club Toulon, having headed overseas after the All Blacks' 2015 World Cup win. Speaking publicly today for the first time since his return to New Zealand, Nonu acknowledges a hat-trick of World Cups is appealing.
Well, I think it's there, in everyone's minds. For me, it's trying to make the Blues team first, so one step at a time.
Ma'a Nonu. The Blues host the Crusaders in their opening match on Saturday night at Eden Park. The New Zealand cricket coach, Gary Stead, is demanding a ruthless performance from his side in the three-match one-day series against Bangladesh. The series starts tomorrow in Napier, with the home side coming off a 4-1 series loss to India. Stead says he wants a strong showing from his side in what is their final one-day series ahead of May's World Cup.
We've had similar plans right throughout ODI cricket from when I've started right through to now, and we didn't necessarily execute them that well versus India all the time. So I think we need to just be really clear on what we're trying to achieve, and it's almost for me about putting the opposition aside and saying this is the way we want to play our cricket and getting out there and doing that.
Black Caps coach Gary Stead. And horse racing in Britain will resume on Thursday after a 6-day shutdown following an outbreak of equine flu. That's the news.
Trouble in the air with China.
I don't think that's the case that you simply get on the blower and say do us a favour.
Clearing the air in Nelson.
And the breeze was still blowing from the south. That was when the smoke was in the valley, when the breeze had actually swung round. She was all quite a different scene.
Hot air in Northland.
I was personally attacked by Shane. That puts me in exalted company with Air New Zealand and Frontier, so I'm feeling very proud about that.
Morning Report on the air, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, how sport and physical activity in prisons can reduce reoffending. And after 10, we're turning trash to treasure with inventor Veena Sahajwala, who's looking at innovative ways to reuse rubbish. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now through to midnight tomorrow Wednesday from Met Service, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Any remaining showers clearing this afternoon, becoming fine. Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including the Central High Country. Cloudy periods, isolated showers becoming fine tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers, mainly about the ranges. Wellington, Wairarapa, Nelson and Marlborough, fine apart from some cloudy periods about the Sounds in Wellington. Bulla to Fiordland, fine spells. Isolated showers increasing for Fiordland tomorrow. Canterbury to Southland, mainly fine. Isolated light showers in Otago and Southland about now. And through the evening, low cloud about the coast at times. And to the Chatham Islands, low cloud and occasional drizzle. It's nearly 9 minutes past 5.
And you're listening to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen and this is RNZ National. Malcolm Rewa's lawyer has turned the tables on the victim's son, accusing Dallas Mackay of killing his own mother to get his inheritance. Rewa is on trial at the High Court in Auckland, charged with murdering Susan Burdett, who was raped and bludgeoned to death in her South Auckland home nearly 27 years ago. In 1998, Rewa was convicted of raping her, but 2 juries were unable to decide whether he murdered Ms. Burdett. Annika Smith has been in court and filed this report.
Dallas Mackay took the stand today and told the jury about finding and then losing his biological mother. Ms. Burdett was 16 when she gave birth to her son, who was fostered by his paternal grandparents. Mr. Mackay said he grew up thinking his father was actually his brother and didn't meet Ms. Burdett until he was 20. He said they got on well, especially when they realised they shared a love for Tempin bowling.
She loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Do you get any sense how often she was playing in any given week?
Must have been at least twice a week.
And was she any good?
Yeah, she wasn't too bad, but she wasn't as good as me.
He told Crown Prosecutor Gareth Kays his relationship with Ms. Burdett flourished in the few years they had together. He commuted from Whangarei to Auckland for Tempin bowling events, where he grew concerned about his mother's security.
She used to leave it open at night for air to keep the cool.
Did you ever raise any concerns with her about her leaving the window open like that?
Yes, yeah. Living alone, you should lock everything up.
He told the court he first heard about his mother's death on the radio.
What was the news article about?
A 39-year-old woman living alone in Papatauitau had been found bludgeoned to death.
Did you think of Susan Burdett?
Yeah, and I thought, nah, Nah, can't be. Wouldn't be. Couldn't possibly be.
Mr Mackay said he'd played darts at a local pub the night his mother died, before returning home at around 11 o'clock. Rewa's lawyer, Paul Chambers, said this timeline provided him ample opportunity to drive from Whangarei to Auckland to murder his mother and then return. He put to Ms Burdett's son that he had everything to gain from killing her, including inheriting $250,000 through her life insurance policy. It was a proposition firmly denied by Mr Mackay, who told Mr Chambers he'd got it wrong and he wasn't the one on trial. The trial before Justice Venning and a jury is set down for 4 weeks. Atuiti ko te mātua ko Annika Smith aho.
An internationally renowned cancer doctor says Pharmac is ignoring clear evidence by refusing to fund new life-extending drugs. New Zealand's advanced breast cancer patients are dying far quicker than other developed countries. As Pharmac considers yet another application to fund the drugs, there are calls for an independent review into its funding model. Our reporter Alex Perrottet and cameraman Nick Munro have been investigating.
It's the most commonly diagnosed and deadliest cancer for New Zealand women. It claims 600 Kiwis a year. And for people suffering breast cancer in its advanced stages, just the talk around conferences and in online communities of people living longer and more comfortably fuels their hope. In recent years, new drugs have become available that have proven to give those crucial months and years.
People's quality of life and their ability to take medication or treatments that will prolong their life means that they'll be able to spend time with their children, an extra 1 year or 2 years to see your child get to school or to reach a significant milestone. That is the kind of thing that we mean in New Zealand normally by quality of life.
But National MP Maggie Barry and plenty of others are concerned that there's a new normal where the limited budget for cancer drugs has no room for those who are considered terminal. Sue Walcade is one of the 300 women diagnosed each year with advanced metastatic breast cancer. She might not live to see 2020 and says the medical industry seems to put them in the too hard basket, sending the message that treating them is not as important as curing others. The message hit home when she was seeking advice on whether to take a short trip away and miss a treatment visit.
My nurse said to me, so it's okay. If it's a curative treatment, then I would be concerned, but it's not. So I just sat there and went, ouch. So for stage 4 is all our treatments are palliative. They're not curative.
Dr. Fatima Cardoso is a senior medical oncologist from Portugal and founder and chair of Advanced Breast Cancer Global Alliance. She has a scathing review for this country's provision of cancer drugs.
So we have drugs that really improve survival by a substantial number of months. And in countries where there is access to those drugs, the median survival of these patients is about 60 months, so 5 years. And in New Zealand, in the report, they have just 13 months. So clearly, there is a lack of access to drugs that save lives.
Yes, you heard that right. Patients in New Zealand, on average, are dying far quicker than in many other countries.
I'm afraid that within the well-developed countries, it ranks quite badly, I'm afraid to say, because there are certain types of treatments that I believe could certainly be affordable for a country like yours.
Tracy Barr-Smith was clever with her cancer. In 2012, she self-diagnosed, got onto it early and followed all the advice. But she's always felt that those who should be helping her could and should have done a lot more. When the cancer came back in 2017, she was misdiagnosed for months, with doctors saying it was just a bad back. And when she finally got in front of an MRI scanner,
I just lit up the screen with metastatic breast cancer throughout my spine.
Now all she's asking for is a drug that will give her a few more vital years.
I just can't picture my life being that this is all I have to give. That in 2 to 3 years I could be gone when I'm only 48. I'm not even 50. right now, the way everything is going, the way you're hearing the reports, I'm unlikely to make it to my mid-50s. I'm young, I'm vibrant, I've got so much to give. I want to work, I want to live. I've got a family that needs me. I've got parents who are in their mid to late 70s. I can't even imagine what they're thinking, that they potentially could be burying their daughter before they pass on in this world.
Sue Walcade says as time marches on, her options in New Zealand aren't all that appealing.
I will be at a point where I need to make a decision whether I go on to another type of chemo, and you know, all the toxicity that comes with that, or look at the unfunded option, which is the Kadcyla or the TDM1, which will cost me 10 grand a month. So, you know, whether I go down the path of the New Zealand's new health scheme called Give a Little Page.
Sue says she's gobsmacked that Pharmac last year announced $200 million in savings over 4 years.
I don't think it's lack of budget, but I think it's lack of whatever the strategy or objectives for Pharmac are. They're wrong. They simply must be wrong. If we are lagging behind out of 28 OECD countries, then something's really wrong. Something is really vitally wrong.
Dr Cardoso says for these women, an extra year or two in the face of such a disease is the epitome of survival. And two options that could very well help them are not funded by Pharmac. Her organisation, the Global Alliance, ranks the effectiveness of drugs currently on the market and available to OECD countries. 1 means ineffective, 5 is very effective. She says Kadcyla, or TDM1, is ranked 5 out of 5. And Ibrance, while not as effective, is crucial in giving greater quality of life. They are funded in other countries such as the UK and Australia, but not here.
These drugs should be your top priority because this is where you can have the biggest impact in terms of survival.
Pharmac's Chief Executive Sarah Fitt was not available for an interview, but sent us a statement saying that while the treatments look promising, they only offer modest benefits to patients and the price is prohibitively expensive. She says Pharmac has received further applications for them to fund the drug, but they'll only look at those applications later this month and publish the discussions later in March. But here's the thing, Dr Cardoso says the tests have been proven beyond doubt. And if Pharmac simply admitted that the only impediment was the cost, then perhaps greater pressure could be put on the government.
They cannot say that the benefit is not demonstrated. The benefit is demonstrated. The scale is an objective way of grading that benefit. Then another discussion is what are you willing to pay for that amount of benefit. But then they cannot use a reason to say that they do not fund that the benefit has not been proven, because that's not true.
So, another discussion paper to be published next month. But for these patients, every month is both a milestone and an incredibly painful wait.
It just seems to me that they are doing whatever they can just to put us off and not to address the situation.
A 2018 report by the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research said an excessive focus on price and an inability to take advantage of new opportunities can end up costing the health system more. The report called for investigation into what it described as missed opportunities. Maggie Barry says she and the National Party support that call.
The Pharmac model at its heart is good. I think that it would be very helpful if the government agreed to fund it at a better level. $200 million has been not put back into funding for Pharmac as an investment, money that the Labor government has taken away and reapportioned. I think that's wrong. I think that $200 million that's missing needs to be given back to Pharmac.
Tracy Barr-Smith says the review must be independent.
I don't know of any other company that can spend that amount of money and not be accountable back to their shareholders. we as a New Zealand taxpayer are our shareholders, so they need to be accountable to us for how they spend that money.
Sue Walcade has a clear message for Pharmac.
Accept the evidence that's already out there and stop asking for more. If it's good enough for Australia, if it's good enough for America, if it's good enough for the UK, then it's good enough for New Zealand, unless New Zealand have different blood. Why don't you understand that the evidence is already there?
And she has an even more direct message to the Health Minister, David Clark.
Wake up. Do your job. Pharmac's answerable to you. You should be asking questions.
Sue Walcade ending that report by Alex Perrottet and Nick Munro. After 6, we'll hear from the Health Minister David Clark about that issue, but do let us know what you think. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. The state of emergency in Tasman has been extended for another week. Thousands of people have been evacuated from homes throughout the district since the first fire broke out in Pigeon Valley a week ago. And while evacuated residents were allowed back into Wakefield yesterday, Civil Defence says the owners of about 200 properties in Tasman might have to stay out of their homes for several more days. Nita Blake-Person is in the Tasman region and filed this report.
When the call went out on Friday afternoon for Glenn George and his wife to leave their Pigeon Valley home, they left not knowing how long they'd be gone.
We got an Air Force woman come round at about 1:30 Friday afternoon and said, look, the police are coming down the road, we're going to have to get out now. And a few minutes later, 4 or 5 people arrived and policewoman said, how long is it going to take for you? I said, look, 10 minutes to load up our dogs. So we've got 10 dogs of our own plus 6 dogs that our son had left us while he was on holiday. And she said, OK, she'll be back in 10 minutes, like they wanted us gone then.
They've been living in their camper van at the Richmond AMP grounds.
The support has been amazing. Like they've been bringing in food. Like this morning, for example, I got a knock on the camper van door. Woman was out there with bacon and eggs, sausages, hash browns, tomatoes. When I looked like obviously I was keen on it, she said, well, how much can you eat?
Glenn says it would be nice to get home soon, if not for them, for their dogs.
We are keen to get back home and get things back to normality. We've got the dogs here. We get them walking around. They will be pleased to be back home. Yes, it will be good to be back home, but we're rolling with it. It's okay here. We certainly understand that this is a big operation. We'll just go with the punches.
It's not just residents who are feeling the burn. Andrew Schwass is the director of Kiwi Journeys and offers cycle trail experiences in the area. But the closure of cycle trails through the hills and on Rabbit Island, the site of another fire last week, has put a huge strain on Andrew's business.
We've got employees sitting at home, so we're paying them. Our business is probably 80% shut down at the moment, so it's not ideal. It's just thousands of dollars a day, really.
And Andrew says he's concerned help for businesses like his is a long way away.
Try to get some answers, but I know there's no help, so and you have to rely on your own business insurance, which for us, we're at a level where it's too costly to get that insurance on the unlikely event something like this happens. But yeah, it's the second year in a row we've had a major incident, so last year we were underwater, this year we need water.
There are 600 people on the ground here working on the fire relief. Tasman's Mayor Richard Kempthorne says that comes at considerable cost.
Some of them are the volunteer firefighters. Some of them can't do the harvesting work that they get paid to do, and they're volunteer firefighting. So I meant to mention this morning the wives and families are really noticing that, and particularly income. So that's just one of the issues. We've got other businesses, large businesses and small, that are impacted by this.
The government has made $70,000 available to help farmers affected by the blaze. Firefighters expect they'll be battling the fire for weeks to come, and the costs will continue to climb. In Tasman for Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
The government has been blamed for a deteriorating relationship with China and told to get its act together quickly to sort it out. An opening ceremony planned for the 2019 China-New Zealand Year of Tourism has been postponed after China advised there were changes to the schedule on its side. MPs were back at Parliament today, and while the Prime Minister laid out her government's plans for the year ahead, all questions to her were about what's happening with the relationship with China. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The 2019 China-New Zealand Year of Tourism was announced back in 2017 with much fanfare. The official opening was due to take place next week. However, at the last minute, China advised the event would have to be postponed. Officials from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment are working with China to try to reschedule it. But National's trade spokesperson Todd McClay says the event has been planned for more than 2 years.
New Zealand businesses have put a lot of effort and a lot of money into making sure that it will be successful. It's a very concerning signal, I think.
The Executive Director of the New Zealand-China Council, Stephen Jacoby, says it's too early to read too much into the postponement.
If there is a move to reinstate it or reschedule it, then this may well have been a storm in a teacup. But I do think it is significant and potentially concerning that it can't go ahead on the date that it was previously announced.
Todd McClay says the Tourism Minister Calvin Davis should be winging his way to China on the next plane to sort it out.
Tourism is very important to New Zealand, but so is trade and so is our international relationship. I think that it's very concerning that Jacinda Ardern is the first elected Prime Minister not to visit China within the first year in office since before Robert Muldoon. That in itself speaks volumes.
Jacinda Ardern says she has a standing invitation to visit China, but so far she and China's leader have been unable to find a suitable date. She says a number of senior ministers have been to China, including the Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters.
We've had 6 ministers visit China. We've had visits here. And so that some of that has not been discussed, and yet those exchanges continue, our exports continue, tourism continues.
The latest postponements come on the back of an Air New Zealand plane being turned back mid-flight from China after the airline had not registered correctly with Chinese authorities, and New Zealand spy agency blocking Spark's bid to use the Chinese company Huawei's equipment in the 5G rollout due to national security concerns. National's leader Simon Bridges is laying the blame for the tourism event being postponed squarely at the feet of Winston Peters.
I think it's really clear if you look back whether it's been his careless and intemperate remarks around the Belt and Road Initiative of Xi Jinping, whether it has been a raft of other things that he said on the defence statement and strategy, whether it's been his speech at Georgetown that the Prime Minister didn't know about. All of these things have contributed to what we've seen.
But Winston Peters flatly rejects that, saying the relationship with China is great.
Well, we've had 6 ministers over there, including myself. Our conversations have been extensive both there and around the world. We've got future plans to do things together. There's a big celebration tomorrow night in which I'm speaking. Some of the stuff that's being beat up around here is just simply not true.
Stephen Jacoby says the issue is that New Zealand is only so important to China.
I know it might come as a shock to some people, but they don't wake up every day thinking about New Zealand. And so we have to make the running on the relationship, and that's why the deferment of these visits and events is problematic for us. Not because I think China is plotting some sort of retaliation in New Zealand for the things we might have done recently in the relationship, but rather because we won't have the opportunity to develop the relationship in the way we want to.
Atu i te whare pāri mata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
On Checkpoint on RNZ National, Judith Collins live. Is Simon Bridges' leadership dead in the water? And does the All Black jersey still cry out to Ma'anonu? We would love your feedback. Don't forget, you can text in on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thank you, Lisa. And Susan Burdett's son has been accused of killing his mother to receive an inheritance. Malcolm Rewa is on trial at the High Court in Auckland, charged with murdering Ms Burdett in Papatoetoe 27 years ago. He was convicted of raping her, but 2 juries were unable to decide whether he murdered Ms Burdett. Ms Burdett's son, Dallas Mackay, told the jury today he was at home in Whangarei the night his mother died and first heard about it on the radio. Rewa's lawyer, Paul Chambers, said Mr Mackay had plenty of opportunities opportunity to kill and much to gain. The owners of about 200 rural properties southwest of Nelson have been told it could be several days before they can return home. Thousands of people have been evacuated throughout the district since the Tasman fire began in Pigeon Valley a week ago. The state of emergency has been extended for another week, and Civil Defence says residents will be allowed only restricted access. Wakefield residents went home yesterday, but Civil Defence spokesperson Jim Frater says cordons will remain in place in places where the fire threat remains high. A woman who has accused a Northland police officer of sexually assaulting her says the experience was a nightmare. Detective Inspector Kevin Burke has pleaded not guilty to charges of sexual assault. Under examination by the Crown at the High Court in Auckland today, the complainant said she told Mr Burke in 2002 she was worried about a man's fraudulent behaviour. The woman says weeks later he turned up to her house to talk about the investigation, which is when she says he sexually assaulted her. And negotiators in the US Congress say they've reached a tentative deal on border security funding that would avoid a looming government shutdown. Republican Senator Richard Shelby told reporters that staff were now feverishly putting together all the details. The news came as the President Donald Trump addressed a campaign-style rally in the border city of El Paso, Texas. No details of the new deal have been released, and it's unclear whether Mr Trump will get any money for his border wall or whether he'll endorse the agreement. Those are the headlines.
Thank you, Paul. And just in, actually, we've got notification that a firefighter has been hospitalised with dehydration as crews continue to try and contain the Tasman fire. Fire and Emergency says the fire still has the potential for reburn. Incident controller Trevor Mitchell says they're still operating under extreme fire conditions, and that the forecast is that the week will get progressively warmer until Thursday. He says resourcing levels are staying the same and they're likely to be fighting the fire through the night and for a while to come. That is the latest update there. Let's bring Nona Peltier in. Business news, economic activity, Nona. So the wheels are still turning, but what? Starting to slow? Handbrakes coming on?
Very good. Oh, I love that. Yeah, we have this thing called the truckometer, which is a monthly measure of how the economy is going, and it's based on traffic, vehicle traffic. So there's the heavy truck traffic and there's the light vehicle traffic. The heavy truck traffic tells us what's really going on now, and that indicates that our economy, well, the measure indicates it was up to, 3.5% on the month before. Pretty good. And the light traffic, which is 6 months forward, was up 2.2%. Also quite a good indicator. However, Sharon Zollner, who's the chief economist at ANZ Bank, who developed the truckometer, as a matter of fact, suggests that perhaps that's just, well, interesting, but the bigger picture shows the economy is not in the shape that the truckometer would indicate. So we'll see what happens there. What she sort of basically is saying is the indicators are kind of mixed at the moment.
Okay, well, electronic cards, and are we talking what, credit cards, debit cards, all cards?
Pretty much. Yeah, so anything that's not cash, pretty much, yeah.
So even EFTPOS we're including in
Yes, that's right.
Okay, how have the latest stats stacked up?
Interesting. We had a seasonally adjusted rise last month. So in January, this post-Christmas, 1.8% up on the year earlier. And that clawed back some of the fall that we saw in December. Now, core retail spending was also up. That's what excludes, say, fuel and vehicle-related costs. That rose 2.2%. Now, Statistics New Zealand says maybe it's just a lag in processing the payments. So we ended up with some indicators this month, which, even though they look strong, might not be.
All right.
What can I say about that? But that's it. There you go. Statistics.
And market. Any other highs and lows that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, interestingly, so we're waiting right now for the Reserve Bank statement on monetary policy, which is coming out tomorrow afternoon. They've changed the time. Normally it comes off in the morning, Thursday morning. We're going to get it Wednesday afternoon. So that's sort of the new era of Governor Adrian Orr. Anyway, so the Kiwi is steady at 67.3 US cents, 95.1 Australian and 52.3 pence, which is pretty much where it's been now the last couple of days. And our index rose more than 0.75% today, and that's because of a more upbeat sentiment with trade talks seeming to progress well, and perhaps the U.S. government's not going to shut down after all. So we rose 71 points to 9,281.
It's the Trump-ometer, that one, isn't it?
The Trump-ometer, that's right.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our business news. Let's go back to politics now. More New Zealanders would prefer Judith Collins as Prime Minister over her boss, Simon Bridges. Now, that is according to the latest News Hub Read Research poll. The National MP for Papakura ranks 6.2%, while her party leader sits at just about 5%. Judith Collins joins me now live. Hi, Judith. How does it feel to be...
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thank you. How does it feel to be more popular than boss? Your boss?
Well, it's just one poll, but the big thing is I'm more popular than Winston Peters, and that's the major issue.
But probably
Look,
people...
it's just a poll. I don't get too excited about it.
Was it awkward today when you turned up to work? What did you talk to him about?
Everyone was lovely, including Simon. Look, we're very focused on doing the job, and my job's really holding the government to account on housing, urban development, RMA. That's what I'm doing.
So I heard you say today that you're not interested in the leadership, but you were at this time last year, so what's changed?
Well, the fact is that we are working very well as a team, and leadership is always an issue for caucus. They have made their decision. I'm just getting on doing my job, and I've always taken the view that whatever job I've been given in Parliament, that I will do it the best of my ability. That's what I'm doing, and I just think I'm just focused on doing my job, and that's actually all I'm doing.
So is your strategy to wait for him really to bottom out? Is that your strategy?
My strategy is to do the very best job I can. I've been, elected, very luckily and fortunately elected as the MP in Clevedon and then Papakura in 6 elections.
Oh, come on, Judith! You're more ambitious than that, and you're the one who's you're the one who's got the bump in the polls, right? So,
well, it's flattering, but it's only a poll, and I don't get too excited. I've been around long enough to know they come up and they go down, and I just never get that excited.
But here's the thing. Leaders do live and die on polls, and Andrew Little is an example of that. So at what point does someone lose the mandate to lead? When they sink under 5% in the preferred Prime Minister stakes, or where's the line in the sand?
It's always up to caucus, and my view is they've made their decision, and I'm just doing my job.
So at what point would you get nervous about the leader? Less than 5%?
Well, I'm not the leader, so I don't have to be nervous.
No, but you get a vote, don't you? You get a vote on the leadership. You get a voice.
Well, Lisa, you are naughty. I'm just doing my job, and that's all I want to do, and that's why I'm happy to work with the team. And Simon and I get on very well. We work well together. I'm just doing my job.
But the thing is, okay, you might work well together, you might get on well with him, but the aim of the game is to get back into government, is it not? So, would the party be better off with you leading it?
Well, it's not my choice. I'm just doing my job.
I'm asking you your opinion.
My view is I'm not going to... Well, my opinion is I have to do my job, and that's what I'm doing. And as for the leader, the caucus has voted for the leader, and he is doing the very best job that he can. It's a tough job, and I think people sometimes underestimate. I've seen a lot of opposition leaders come and go, and it's a very tough job, and people should not underestimate how difficult it is.
Yeah, you're right. It is a tough job, and you're doing better than he is in the preferred Prime Minister stakes. So help him out here, Judith. Where can he improve?
Look, I tell you what, I don't tell other people how to do their job.
You want him to do better, don't you? You want him to do better, so give him some pointers.
I would like us to be in government, and that's what I'm focused on doing, my bit to help us do that. And I'll work with, Simon and everyone in the team to help make it happen. So
Jacinda Ardern moved into the Labour Party leadership after she took over Andrew Little in the preferred Prime Minister stakes, and the party vote for Labour dropped. So are you Nationals Jacinda Ardern, Judith Collins?
No, I think I'm Judith Collins, but I'd also say is that we don't want to have years and years of chopping and changing like Labor did. I think one of the big things that people expect from us, and certainly our voters expect from us, is that we get on with the job, and that's all I'm doing, just doing my job. So what phone calls did you get after this poll went public last night? How many conversations did you have? I could tell you what, I was giving a speech after
Yeah, but after that, did you miss a few calls? Did you miss a few calls, Judith?
Mostly from you media people. You're always wanting to call. I tell you, I just don't get that excited. So I think it's very foolish to get excited about
excitement aside.
One poll.
Not asking you about the excitement levels. Did you get any calls last night to discuss leadership and the poll and where you were sitting in the poll?
I don't think so. Maybe, maybe a relative or something, but I don't think so.
I think so?
The big thing is, I don't think so. I mean, I have to say, I didn't finish the speech until about 10:30 last night, so not many people were ringing me after that.
Okay, so it's not just the leadership numbers for Simon Bridges, national numbers overall, they're sliding as well. Why is that? What are you doing wrong?
Well, I think we're actually working very hard, so I would just say that it could just be one particular poll. Or
it could just be the leader.
People need to understand. Well, I think that all you can do, and you can't ever worry about what a government's doing, and when we're in opposition, we've just got to do the best we can. And what I'm seeing is a very hard-working, very dedicated team, and we are person to person so much better than the other side.
Judith Collins, National MP there, thanks for joining us, and we'll hear more from other MPs within the National Party on that after 6. The father of a woman found dead in her car last year says having a murder charge against her boyfriend thrown out does nothing to bring closure to the family. Paddy Woods was due to go on trial today, accused of murdering 21-year-old Zena Campbell in Wellington last February. But instead, the charge against him was dismissed. Laura Dooney was in the High Court in Wellington.
Paddy Wood's trial was expected to start today, a year and a day after Zena Campbell's body was found in a car parked on an Aro Valley street in Wellington. She was believed to have been strangled to death. But new evidence showed while there was evidence of pressure on her neck, strangulation could not be considered the cause of her death. In light of that, an application to have the charges against 31-year-old Mr Woods dismissed was accepted by Judge Justice Collins. Outside court, her father Chris Campbell said that wouldn't bring him any closure.
All we can hope is that she'd pass quietly and that was that. That's all I can say is that, doesn't bring her back, so no matter what. Even if he had been convicted or anything like that, it wouldn't have brought her back, so there's no gain in any of it.
He says the past year has been very hard.
And I don't want any family to ever have to go through this, especially a father, a mother, a father, to lose their child early.
Paddy Wood's lawyer, Kevin Preston, says the past year has been traumatic for his client.
Mr Woods, as a consequence of the accusation, lost his liberty for a period of time, lost his job, and additionally been accused of being responsible for Zenith's death, has involved an intense scrutiny of his personal life. Mr Woods wishes now to try and rebuild his life and to grieve for the passing of his partner, free at last from the shadow of the accusation.
In his decision to dismiss the charges, Justice Collins says Ms Campbell had taken a potentially fatal concoction of drugs the night she died. The night before, Mr Woods had put Ms Campbell in a chokehold as part of their sexual activity, possibly causing the injuries to her neck. Justice Collins says new evidence from Crown pathologist Dr Amy Sparks meant he was sure a jury could not have been satisfied, beyond reasonable doubt, that Mr Woods caused the death of Miss Campbell. Justice Collins acknowledged the family and friends of Zena Campbell.
I'm conscious that yesterday was the anniversary of her passing. You will have been told that it is not my task to determine the cause of Ms Campbell's death. My role is to impartially administer the criminal law. Dr Sparks' evidence today necessitated the dismissal of the charge against Mr Woods.
Then Justice Collins told Paddy Woods he was free to stand down. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, ko Laura Dooney tēnei.
After late-night talks in Washington, negotiators in the US Congress say they've reached a tentative deal on border security funding just 4 days before another partial government shutdown would have taken effect. Republican Senator Richard Shelby told reporters that staff were now feverishly putting together all the details. The news came as President Donald Trump addressed a campaign-style rally in the border town of El Paso. Elizabeth Brown reports.
Donald Trump's demand for $5.7 billion to help construct his border wall triggered the government funding crisis, which led to last month's historic 35-day shutdown, and this week threatens another. No details of the new deal have been released, and it's unclear whether Mr Trump will endorse it. But in terms of the rhetoric, he wasn't giving up as he spoke to his base in El Paso, Texas.
So we probably have some good news, but who knows? Who knows? We're setting the stage, folks. You know what it's called, right? It's called we're setting the stage. We're setting the table. We're doing whatever we have to do The wall's being built. It'll continue. It's going at a rapid pace. The Rio Grande. It's happening. Go check it out.
And to chants of USA and build the wall, Mr. Trump said America's economy is on fire, and that's why so many people want to come to the US.
I want people to come in to our country, but they have to come in legally and they have to come in through merit, so they can help us build our country. Make America great again. Pretty soon, we're going to be singing, Keep America Great. Keep America Great.
While Mr. Trump's arrival in El Paso was met with cheers from his supporters, a counter-protest was taking place just blocks away. Demonstrators took to the streets to dispute claims made by Mr. Trump during his State of the Union address that El Paso had gone from being a violent city to a safe city because a border fence had been built there. Among the protesters was potential Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke. He argued that El Paso is safe not because of walls, but in spite of them.
Oh, this is inspiring. This is the border standing up for itself. This is El Paso telling our story. No one can tell it better than we can. Safe, strong, secure community. That's who we are.
And Mr. O'Rourke and the protest clearly didn't escape Mr. Trump's notice.
Watch what the news does tomorrow, though. They won't mention the disparity. They'll say, Beto O'Rourke. That's his last name, right? O'Rourke? Beto O'Rourke had a wonderful rally of about 15 people. When they get honest, when the media starts becoming honest, and maybe they will, because we've done something that's never been done before.
Meanwhile, the governor of California has ordered the withdrawal of several hundred National Guard troops from the state's southern border with Mexico in defiance of the Trump administration's request for support from border states. Gavin Newsom, who's a Democrat, has described Donald Trump's border emergency as a manufactured crisis. He says the state's National Guard has better things to do.
Our National Guard will go to more appropriate venues. Substantively, the issues related to preparing for the next fire season, address the issue of fire prevention.
And in terms of the new funding deal reached in Washington tonight, it's not clear whether it includes money for Mr. Trump's border wall, but Congress only has until Saturday to pass legislation to avert another federal government shutdown. For Checkpoint, call Elizabeth Brown, Aho.
Hundreds of birds, including protected species, have died in an outbreak of avian botulism in sewage ponds in Kaitaia. Fish and Game say the disease is triggered by hot weather and that the Far North Council should be doing more to prevent the mass deaths. Lois Williams reports.
It's a grim sight, the rotting, bedraggled carcasses of waterfowl piled up at the edge of a sewage pond. For the last few weeks, mallards, grey ducks, geese, swans and herons have been dying at the Kaitaia oxidation ponds. Fish and Game's Northland manager Rudy Hurchis says the cause is avian botulism, a bacterial disease that tends to erupt in hot weather.
It's generally where there's an oxidation pond, where highly enriched water source, where it takes off from. And birds go there during the heat of the day to, drink and roost and be in contact with the water and pick up invertebrates, and that's why they're there. But they ingest the bacterium and then they get sick.
Mr. Hurchis says avian botulism isn't uncommon in New Zealand. Humans can't catch it, but the birds are literally sitting ducks. At this time of year, they molt and become flightless, so they look for a water body where they can hang out until their new wing feathers grow in.
They come to areas like this where there's large areas of open water. They will then become flightless for a period of around 3 weeks, and they're stuck there. They can't go anywhere else.
And the results in Kaitaia this summer have been catastrophic. Work crews have picked up and buried 600 birds, including paradise shelduck, native herons and pied stilts. And Rudy Hurchis says there'll be hundreds more.
These are the birds that we're seeing actually in the ponds. There'll be other birds that are coming down because we're in a drought, ingesting the water and then perhaps taking some of the invertebrates that are there as well, and then flying away. And they are probably dying away from the location, so they're not visible as such to the human population.
The Far North District Council operates the Kaitaia oxidation ponds, and in a statement today it described the lethal outbreaks of avian botulism as a natural occurrence. Rudy Hutchie says that's not strictly true because the council built the ponds and created an ideal breeding ground for the disease. He says it should be using bird scaring devices, gas cannons, to keep the birds away, especially before the summer moult.
There will be a cost to ratepayers, but there's also an obligation under the Wildlife Act that these birds are protected, and it's an offence to kill wildlife, even though it's a natural cause. The cause is artificial. It's basically a man-made issue, and so the councils do have a legal and moral obligation to try and address this.
But the council says it won't be using gas guns to scare the birds away based on expert advice to other councils. It says the birds get used to them and ignore them. The council says in the meantime it's burying the bodies and working on an avian botulism management plan. Long term, it says, the answer may be developing or restoring other more attractive habitats for waterfowl in the area. For Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
It's 10 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do keep sending your feedback in. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Ma'anonu isn't back in the All Blacks, not yet anyway, but one could have been forgiven for thinking that at a training for the Blues Super Rugby team in Auckland today. Nonu left New Zealand in 2015 to play in France, shortly after winning his second World Cup in his 103rd and last test. Now 36 years old, the midfielder has returned for his third stint with the Blues. As Clay Wilson reports, even for a player who achieved it all at the highest level, the lure of the black jersey remains strong.
In a scene more reminiscent to the build-up to an All Blacks test, camera operators and journalists clamoured for position at Blues training today. Given they haven't finished better than 9th in the past 6 Super Rugby seasons, it's a level of interest the Auckland-based franchise are not accustomed to. The media throng were there to see one man, most keen for an answer to one question. Does Ma'anonu want a shot at a third World Cup triumph with the All Blacks?
Well, I think it's there, in everyone's minds. For me, it's trying to make the Blues team first, so one step at a time. Before today,
Nonu hadn't spoken publicly about his return to the Blues in the 5 months since it had been announced. He says he hasn't yet spoken with All Blacks coach Steve Hansen. The 103 Test veteran is back after 3 seasons with the Toulon club in France. Family and a desire for his children to go to school in New Zealand were key parts of that decision, and the thought of hanging up his boots never crossed his mind. And while a return to the All Blacks after a 4-year absence is on his wish list, so too is finally lifting the Super Rugby trophy after 13 years of trying with 3 different franchises.
Yeah, I guess I haven't won a Super Rugby before. Come up short twice and always, played in a lot of semi-finals for the Hurricanes, and it's another driver this year.
If he can get even close to achieving that goal, with a Blues team whose recent struggles are well documented, a spot on the plane to Japan for this year's World Cup may not be out of the question. And after his time in France and a pre-season that has teammates raving about his physical condition, Nonu is optimistic he still has plenty to offer, however this year transpires.
I think, hopefully I've still got, the wiseness upstairs and the physicality as well to play in the Super Rugby, because it's really intense. The top 14 in the Champions Cup is a brutal competition over in Europe, so learned a few things playing week in, week out.
Nonu's return to that routine begins this weekend. The Blues open their 2019 Super Rugby campaign against the Crusaders in Auckland on Saturday night. Mō hotaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
A group of people have gathered in Melbourne to welcome home Hakeem Al Arabi, a refugee soccer player who was detained in Thailand in November after going there for his honeymoon. He was facing extradition to Bahrain over allegations he vandalised a police station there during the Arab Spring uprising. The 25-year-old had been granted refugee status in Australia and plays semi-professional football for the Pascoe Vale club. Yesterday, Bahrain dropped the extradition proceedings after the case sparked outrage in Australia. Here's the ABC's Connie Argis.
It's a day Fatima Yazbek thought might never come. At Melbourne International Airport today, she'll greet refugee Hakeem Al-Arabi, who's been detained in Thailand for more than 2 months after his native country, Bahrain, issued an Interpol red notice.
Hakeem just called us last night from Bangkok Airport before he checked in and before he boarded the flight. He is very happy. He is very grateful to all the efforts of the Australian community, the Australian football community and the Australian government. His family as well are grateful for all the efforts of his supporters, which led to this happy ending.
Fatima Yazbek is the spokeswoman for the Gulf Institute for Democracy and Human Rights and has been supporting his wife, who said in a statement that her heart is full with gratitude and her tears are now of relief and joy. She also thanked all Hakeem Al-Arabi's supporters. Former Socceroo Craig Foster is at the top of that list, who spearheaded the campaign to free him.
It's just amazing, but there were many driving forces. I might have been the one out the front, most public, I guess, because I've got a bit of a platform. But look, some of the people who are working behind the scenes were just extraordinary. There was a huge coalition of people right around the world.
Bahrain officials have said in a statement that the country reserves the right to pursue all necessary actions against Hakeem Al-Arabi, and the guilty verdict for allegedly vandalising a police station remains in place. That's despite the Australian government declaring him a refugee, Interpol dropping a red notice against him, and now Thailand dropping the extradition case. Robert L. Dietz is a former general counsel at the National Security Agency in the United States and was a senior advisor to the director of the CIA. He says this case highlights the need for Interpol to review its international notice system, which is supposed to allow national police forces in member countries to share crime-related information.
I think they need to do a much better job instead of saying, country X says we want a red notice on Joe Schmo. I think that Interpol needs to do a much better job of identifying preliminary evidence, identifying with specificity what crime has been committed, and so forth.
But for now, Fatima Yazbek says that's not what Hakeem Al-Arabi will be focused on today.
He's going to go to see his wife. And maybe they're going to go to have their honeymoon.
And that was Fatima Yazbek there ending Connie Argis's report. Human activity could wipe out 40% of insect species within just a few decades. That's the alarming warning from a major Australian-based scientific study which claims pesticides, agriculture and climate change are all drastically affecting the insect world. The BBC's Victoria Gill has the details.
They're the planet's smallest, most essential workers, producing our food, cleaning up our waste. But changes we're making to the environment threaten the very existence of Earth's insect population. That's according to scientists who analysed dozens of insect surveys that were carried out all over the world over the last 13 years. It revealed that many species are now sliding towards extinction at a dramatic rate. Overall, 41% of the world's insect species are in decline, and that includes some very familiar creatures. 49% of beetles are declining, 37% of mayflies, and 53% of butterflies and moths.
So that's one of the groups that's troubled?
Absolutely. So moths, bees and beetles are all massively in trouble right now.
Those losses, scientists say, could jeopardise our way of life.
So much of our atmospheric carbon, which is linked to climate change, that's stored in the soil, and that's cycled through the soil by insects. Our food is grown in soil that's made by insects, and then our food is then pollinated by insects. And every single step along that has an insect associated with it that's doing an important job. And without that, then we just lose the ability to produce food, won't we?
But as much as we rely on insects, it's primarily our activities and our food production practices that have been driving these declines.
There are three key things that this study highlights as threats to our planet's insect diversity: climate change, invasive species, and critically, how we use our land, the increasing intensification of agriculture.
Around the world, suitable habitat is being consumed by farming and urbanisation. And the study says widespread use of synthetic pesticides is a major driver of insect loss. Bug lovers can help by making gardens more pollinator friendly. But researchers say food production will have to change to stop our most important pollinators becoming collateral damage in the battle against pests.
And that's Victoria Gill reporting there. Let's go back to a story we had earlier in the program about life-prolonging cancer drugs. Carolyn Brown has emailed, and I just want to read some of that to you. She says, there seems to be a mistaken view held by Pharmac staff and others that those of us with advanced breast cancer are lying on our deathbeds hoping for funding for a drug that will prolong our miserable lives for just a little bit longer. She says, we're nurses, teachers, lawyers, police officers, caregivers, community workers, full-time parents, and so much more. We are seeking fairness, Carolyn says, in the process which allows access to medications which prolong the quality of our lives to ensure that we can contribute to our community and our families for as long as possible. But there's another view there. Susan says, very expensive drugs that are only going to give a few months more life, then no, they shouldn't be funded. She says there isn't a bottomless pit of money.
This is RNZ National, and it's time for the news at 6, but we are waiting. Oh no, we have that available to us now. A firefighter has been hospitalised with dehydration as crews continue efforts to contain the Tasman fire. Fire and Emergencies Incident Controller Trevor Mitchell says otherwise it's been another good day of getting through hotspots and increasing the security of the lines around the fire. He says they're likely to be fighting the fire night and day for a while to come, and resourcing levels are staying the same.
We had a firefighter hospitalised today with dehydration. She's fine, she's been rehydrated at the hospital, and we expect her to be released soon. So it just sort of emphasises the conditions that our people are working in up the hill, and it is quite a hazardous environment for everybody to work in.
Trevor Mitchell says they're still operating under extreme fire conditions, and the forecast is that the week will get progressively warmer until Thursday. Civil Defence says residents of about 200 Tasman properties still can't go home and might not be able to for several days yet. As well, the state of emergency has been extended for a further week. Wakefield evacuees returned home yesterday, but the Civil Defence Controller Jim Frater says cordons will remain in place in several key sites where the fire threat remains high. He says residents of the so-called Four Valleys are allowed restricted access, but it will be some time yet before they can return home for good.
So, at the moment, we cannot confirm when conditional re-entry process for the Valley residents will begin.
Jim Frater of Civil Defence. Cordons remain in place at Pigeon Valley, where the fire began a week ago, and Teapot and Eves Valleys, Golden Hills, Redwood Hills and Barton Lane West. The lawyer representing serial rapist Malcolm Rewa has accused Susan Burdett's son of killing his mother, an accusation he firmly denied. Rewa is on trial in the High Court at Auckland after pleading not guilty to murdering Ms Burdett, who was clubbed to death in her Papatoetoe home in 1992. Mr Mackay said he had played darts at a local pub the night his mother died before returning to his Whangarei home about 11 o'clock. Rewa's lawyer, Paul Chambers, said this timeline provided him ample opportunity to drive to Auckland, to murder his mother and then return. Mr Chambers said Mr Mackay, who was 22 at the time, had much to gain from her death, including $250,000 through her life insurance policy. Mr Mackay told Mr Chambers he's got it wrong and he wasn't the one on trial. A woman accusing a Northland police officer of sexual assault while he was investigating crimes against her says the experience was a nightmare. The trial of Detective Inspector Kevin Burke, who has pleaded not guilty to charges of sexual assault, is continuing in the High Court at Auckland. Jessie Chang reports.
Under examination by the Crown, the complainant said she met Mr Burke in 2002 when she told him her concerns about a man's fraudulent behaviour. She said she felt relieved that someone believed her when the detective told her he had been trying to find this particular man for a long time. Roughly 2 weeks later, he turned up to her house unannounced, talking about the investigation while drinking about 12 bottles of beer. It was after that, she said, he assaulted her. The woman only laid a complaint against Mr Burke in 2017 after she saw another allegation against him. She will be cross-examined tomorrow by the defence. A second woman will give evidence later in the trial. Ko Jessie Chang tēnei.
The National Party MP Judith Collins says she doesn't get excited about polls, and the big takeaway was that she is more popular than the Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters.
On the eve of the first sitting session for 2019, National slipped below Labour for the first time in more than a decade in the News Hub Reid research poll. The National leader, Simon Bridges, also polled below one of his MPs, Judith Collins, who ran against him in the leadership contest last year in the preferred Prime Minister stakes. The MP for Papakura scored 6.2%, while her party leader sits at just 5%. Judith Collins told Checkpoint the Leader of the Opposition is a tough job and she's focused on holding the government to account.
It's flattering, but it's only a poll, and I don't get too excited. I've been around long enough to know they come up and they go down, and I just never get that excited.
The National Party MP Judith Collins. A Tokelau High Court judge says he's not sure he has the authority to reverse decisions by the territory's government. The comments from Judge Peter Churchman came during a landmark hearing of the High Court, which is sitting in New Zealand. Two former public servants accused of misspending millions of dollars are seeking to prove their dismissals were wrongful. Judge Churchman told the court today he may have the jurisdiction to come to a finding on the claims, but he says he's unsure if he could quash the Tokelau government's move to fire the pair in 2017. The Fox News TV host Pete Hegseth has confessed on air that he's not washed his hands for 10 years because germs are not a real thing. Speaking on Fox News, Mr. Hegseth declared that infectious microorganisms did not exist because they could not be seen with the naked eye. A graduate of Harvard and Princeton universities, his confession came after his co-hosts chided him for eating leftover pizza. His comments have been met with both support and concern on social media. It's just after 6:06. On to sport now. The desire to win a Super Rugby title was a motivating factor in former All Black Ma'anonu's decision to play in New Zealand again. The 103 Test veteran who won 2 World Cups has returned after 3 seasons playing in France and will play for the Blues this year. Nonu played for the Hurricanes, the Blues and the Highlanders between 2003 and 2015. He's spoken publicly for the first time since coming home 5 months ago and says never managing to win a Super Rugby crown plays on his mind.
Yeah, I guess I haven't won a Super Rugby before. Come up short twice and always played in a lot of semi-finals for the Hurricanes, and it's another driver this year.
Meanwhile, All Blacks Ben Smith and Luke Whitelock have been named co-captains for the Highlanders in this year's Super Rugby competition. The New Zealand cricket coach Gary Stead says the 3 one-dayers against Bangladesh won't decide the opening batting positions for the World Cup. The first game of the series is in Napier tomorrow, with Martin Guptill and Henry Nicholls opening in the first 2 games, while Colin Munro returns for the third. The openers have struggled for runs this summer, failing to post a half-century opening stand in the 8 matches played this year. Stead says he still has an open mind on just who will partner Guptill at the World Cup in England in May. And Wolverhampton Wanderers scored a stoppage-time equaliser to draw 1-1 with Newcastle United in English football's Premier League. Wolves remain 5th, while Newcastle are 16th, just a point above the relegation zone. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, be swept away by an award-winning window on the world of brooms. Kirsten Johnstone has a song crush on Tony Ruins, Fatima and Milk, among others, and our physicist Sean Hendy is going to tell us what the time is, as in how scientists use radioactive decay to work out how old rocks are. Turns out that's something we can thank Ernest Rutherford for. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now we have the short forecast for Met Service through to midnight tomorrow, Wednesday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Any remaining showers clearing about now and becoming fine. Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including the Central High Country, cloudy periods and isolated showers becoming fine tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers, mainly about the ranges. Wellington, Waitatapa, Nelson and Marlborough, fine apart from some cloudy periods around the Sounds and Wellington. Bulla to Fiordland, fine spells and isolated showers. Showers increasing for Fiordland tomorrow. Canterbury to Southland, mainly fine. Isolated light showers in Otago and Southland this afternoon and evening. Low cloud around the coast at times. And for the Chatham Islands, low cloud and occasional drizzle. It's 9 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul. Before you go, do you wash your hands, and have you been doing so for the past 10 years?
Not for a while.
Oh, I don't know if I want to know that.
Nothing to see.
Well, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. We go to Wakefield now, where the Tasman fire is continuing to burn not far away. A firefighter was hospitalised today due to dehydration suffered while battling the blaze, which still hasn't been brought under control. Now, the residents of nearby valleys are spending another night out of their homes with an evacuation notice still in place while crews fight the fire. We will go back to that story shortly. We've still got our own people on the ground there, but that is the latest update. Let's go back to Parliament now. The new parliamentary year has got off to a sour start for National and its leader. MPs returned to Parliament today, less than 24 hours after a key political poll showed the opposition party behind Labour for the first time in more than a decade. And in the preferred Prime Minister stakes, the News Hub Reid Research poll had Simon Bridges pipped by senior MP Judith Collins. And that isn't Mr Bridges' only headache. Today also marked the return of the now independent MP, Jamie Lee Ross, to Parliament. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Another day, another stakeout of National MPs, and the questions were all about the party and its leader's dip in the polls. Northland MP Matt King was among those trying to keep everyone happy.
It's not an either or. We've got Simon as our leader.
And what about Judith, though?
I like Judith. I like Judith. I like Simon. I like Judith. I like a few of our leaders. So.
What do you mean it's not an either or? Surely only one person can be leader.
Yeah, I know, but it's not a case of knocking Simon out because Simon's our leader. So.
But would you be happy to see Judith as leader? You've just said that you like...
Oh, look, there's a number of people in our caucus that could lead our party. Absolutely, there's a number of them.
A former leadership contender, Amy Adams, tried to focus on the volatility of the polls.
Look, we're polling, even by that poll, 41%, and I think if that poll had been taken any other night, you could have had a quite different set of numbers. I think actually where we're polling is pretty good for this stage of the cycle. We're very happy with it.
And she backs Simon Bridges' leadership, saying it's not an easy job.
We always want our numbers to grow. We're always conscious of doing things to move them in the right direction. But what I can tell you is the caucus is very comfortable with how we're tracking and certainly very united behind Simon.
Deputy Leader Paula Bennett was on the same page.
Look, we just think that Simon's our leader, backing him 100%. It's going pretty well as far as we're concerned.
While National's support is still a respectable 41.6% in the party vote, a bigger headache for Simon Bridges is the preferred Prime Minister rankings. One-time leadership contender Judith Collins leapfrogged him to register 6.2%, ahead of Mr Bridges on 5%. She says she's not intending to go for his job.
I'm not even interested. My role is to stay very focused on holding Phil Twyford to account, and I think I've been doing, if I may say so myself, a reasonable job on that.
A few hours later, Simon Bridges fronted up to reporters about the poll result on his way into caucus.
I'm very confident and comfortable in my leadership. It's a party vote that matters. That's jumping around, but the truth of that is you've got right now a party in opposition that's polling as high as any other I can think of halfway through a new term.
Mr Bridges attributes some of his difficulties with his personal poll rating to the controversy involving Rebel MP Jamie Lee Ross.
I had to deal with a difficult issue last year. It's all there for all to see. That was disappointing for New Zealanders. I think, though, now we've moved on.
Mr Ross also arrived back at Parliament today as an independent MP after his spectacular fallout with his former colleagues last year. He says he's planning to see out the term and advocate on issues like mental health and housing. Mr Ross says it's good to be back working for the Botany electorate.
I was concerned when I first got back out of the Mental Health Institute to see what the reaction would be, but there's a huge amount of compassion and kindness from humans, and I'm enjoying that, and I appreciate that from my constituents.
Simon Bridges says he's given a statement to the police who are investigating claims of electoral fraud made against him by Mr Ross last year, allegations Mr Bridges denies. He says he's not sure of the time frame for that investigation. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Now, let's go back to Wakefield now and the Tasman fires. As we said earlier, a firefighter has been hospitalised today due to dehydration. Residents of the nearby valleys are spending another night out of their homes. The evacuation order is still in place. And our reporter, Nita Blake-Person, is in Wakefield, where residents yesterday were allowed to return to their homes. She is on the phone now. Hi, Nita. What is the situation with the firefighter?
Hi, Lisa. Well, yes, we heard about her situation being hospitalised at this briefing this afternoon. I think people automatically thought the worst, but they did confirm that it was dehydration that had put her in there. Unfortunately, she was expected to be out again this evening. She had been rehydrated, and it sounds like everything's okay. But it does show the conditions these firefighters are working in down here. It is stinking hot, and that is out of the valleys. It's just been beautiful blue skies again today, about 26 degrees, but a lot hotter in those valleys. Then you add on that safety gear and the fact that the ground is literally smouldering around them. So incredibly tough conditions, and a lot of the firefighters are now on the ground more than they were earlier when they were, a lot more helicopters were involved. It was more of an aerial effort. Now it's more of a ground effort. There are 150 fire staff working on and off on this fire, 9 helicopters down from the higher number there was before, and 13 heavy machines. So incredibly trying conditions for them, and yes, a shame that one was hospitalised today.
So we're also hearing, obviously, that the residents from the valleys, they're not allowed back yet. So when can they expect to go home?
Well, at this stage, we just don't know that. Sorry, excuse the noise in the background. Fire trucks going past me right now. The fire crews are evaluating each property up in those 4 valleys this evening. That's around 200 properties in the Eaves, Redwood, Pigeon and Teapot valleys. They're going through with helicopters and using drones, infrared and heat mapping to figure out exactly where the biggest dangers and risks lie. And then they'll make some decisions about when people may be able to go back. At the moment, they're letting most of those residents through kind of for a few hours each day if they need to check on stock or tend to anything on their properties. But in terms of permanently sending them back, they say that that's constantly being reviewed, but they're just not at a place where they can say that it's safe to do that yet. They may just have to evacuate again very quickly, and that's not easy to do when, you know, you've told everyone to stand down. So at this stage, there's, I think, around 500 evacuees from those 200 properties still not allowed into their homes again tonight.
Thanks, Nita. That is our reporter, Nita Blake-Person, who was in Wakefield there reporting on the situations with the Tasman fire. The Health Minister, David Clark, insists that the Pharmac drug funding model is the envy of other countries, even as an international expert says New Zealand is way behind on breast cancer treatment. Dr. Fatima Cardoso says patients in countries that fund new advanced cancer drugs live on average 5 more years compared to the New Zealand average of 13 months. Patients here with stage 4 cancer say they've been forgotten, and it's high time for an independent review into Pharmac. I asked David Clark how much his life is worth.
The question of how much a life is worth is not something I've prepared for this interview. I think it's fair to say that for most people, their health is the most important thing in their life and the thing which they care most about and would like to see most invested in.
It's an important question though, isn't it, Minister? Because basically, in reality, the health system is making decisions every day based on cost-benefit ratios, so how much a life is worth.
That's right. Certainly for the parties of government, there was a really clear agreement that we wanted to put more money into the health system. The amount of money that was being spent on health as a proportion of our economy actually dropped under the last government, which is very rare in the Western world. And we did some independent analysis to try and work out how much, and we worked out that about 2.3 billion had been stripped out effectively over the 8 last years of the previous government, meaning that in order to get care you had to be sicker to reach the thresholds, and so that's why we put the biggest funding boost in that it had been put in for about 10 years in our first budget.
The thing is though, Minister, some drugs are still not being funded, drugs that would prolong life, and in this case of women with end-stage cancer. So when it comes to that, how important is prolonging life compared to saving it in terms of weighting our spend?
Well, these are the difficult decisions that the experts at Pharmac make, the clinical experts. They have used standard international measures which give us the comparisons with other countries that people often rely upon for their claims about whether we're spending enough or not. They have ways of measuring the quality of life for people and the number of years that they have, and they make calculations that aim to maximise the health benefit for New Zealand from the drug spend.
Yeah, but you set the tone, don't you? So where do you think the weight is? Is it 60-40 in favour of curing? Should 95% of the health dollars go on curing and only 5% on preserving life? Where do you sit on this issue philosophically?
Well, ultimately, I do think that that's a matter for the experts. We believe that
that's
people need to have
That's a cop-out, isn't it, Minister?
Lisa, if you let me finish, I do think it's a good question. I'm not trying to dismiss the question. I think it's a good question. Ultimately, though, I take advice on these things, and I do believe that we, as a country, need to spend more on quality. We spend a lot of money on prolonging life, surgeries. Often there's lots of critique about the Western model of healthcare, where we perform surgeries in the last years of life that stretch out life, but ultimately have a cost to the quality of life for people in their final years. These are difficult and sensitive decisions, but again, I really do think that they're best made by clinical experts.
Well, because it basically comes down, doesn't it? This conflict over funding new life-preserving drugs is pure and simple a rationing issue, isn't it?
No, it's not, unfortunately, quite as simple as that. The advice I receive is that many of the drugs that are coming out don't do what they say they're going to do. And one of the visiting cancer experts, indeed at the recent cancer conference, said that about 70% of these new drugs don't do what they say on the tin. That is the stuff that the clinical experts at Pharmac wade through. There are examples of drugs that have been funded in very short order, some of the new cancer drugs, when they've been shown to have really good evidence behind them, and the case probably best celebrated is the Opdivo, which was a melanoma drug funded in 2016 after just a few months after the application. So these are difficult decisions, and again, Truvada, New Zealand was one of the first countries in the world to fund that to prevent HIV infection. We did that last year. Where the evidence is there, Pharmac can move very quickly. Where the evidence is less clear, they're balancing up how many other treatments they could buy for other conditions.
But we're not 100% clear on what evidence Pharmac is using, because in response to our questions about why it's not funding some of these newer drugs, it says, and says repeatedly, that it is, as you have raised, a lack of evidence and only modest outcomes for these drugs. But a number of doctors working in this area say there is a lack of transparency around Pharmac's analysis, what evidence it's using, what measures it's using. Why don't you make them put all of that information out there so that we can see if these are solid decisions?
I think, you know, there's a tension that's being explored here by Pharmac. They do rely on the international experts, and you can find international experts agreeing broadly around which drugs are more effective and which ones are less effective. It's at the margins that these calls get disputed. Pharmac also is in commercial negotiation with these providers. That's how Pharmac manages to afford more drugs for the population than in other countries with the same budget. It is actually about making sure that there's a negotiation with these companies as well. Now that's part of the Pharmac model. It's not directly related to your question, but it is a factor.
Well, some people would dispute that it's just at the margins that there's disagreement about the effectiveness of these drugs. I mean, we had a recent cancer conference here where a leading oncologist said that we seem to be ignoring very decisive evidence about the effectiveness of some of these drugs. If it's good enough for the UK to fund some of these, Canada and Australia, why isn't it good enough for us?
Well, I'm certainly very interested in the new UK model, and I've relatively recently received advice again from the Ministry of Health on it. They still say it's too soon to evaluate it. The previous early cancer medicines fund that they had set up in the UK, when they evaluated it, they found that there would have been about 5 times as much value generated if the money had been left in the NHS to spend on a variety of drugs rather than put into the cancer fund. So that's why they've started again from scratch a couple of years ago. I'm very interested to see how that new model pans out, and we're expecting research and data to come out on that soon. We want to make sure, I think as a country we'll all agree, that we want to get the best value out of the drug spend that we have as a country, and Pharmac and the clinical experts look at the different models around the world to see how we can get the best value.
Well, best value is subjective, isn't it? Which is why I started by asking you what you think your life is worth, because when Pharmac talks about modest benefits, which might be 4 or 5 months of extra life, that could be an extra 25% living for someone who has got terminal cancer. So for them, it's worth it. So cost benefit is subjective, isn't it?
I would push back a little on that. Of course, for every individual, whatever life they can get is valuable to them. Let's acknowledge that. But those international comparators that are used around quality of life and life years generated by drugs are reasonably standardised. And so that is the kind of measurement that Pharmac will look at. It will look at the research and compare to other countries. It's also the same data that those people rely on that say we're not getting all the drugs that we might want, that we see in use overseas. It's looking at how many life years are preserved by individual drugs and then looking at the mix. And overall, the truth is that most of those countries come and visit New Zealand to see how they can improve their systems by looking at the Pharmac model.
Let's revisit some of your election promises, ensuring all New Zealanders get the same standard of cancer care, no matter where they live. What about the same standard of care regardless of whether they've got a house to sell for treatment or whether they've got a good story that they can put on a Give a Little page to raise money for their treatment? What about equal care regardless of how much you're worth?
Well, this government is absolutely devoted to improving equity of outcomes. That is one of the big problems that's been identified. The best and most effective way of doing that is screening earlier, and the big disparities there are among Māori. There was some improvement under the last Labour government in terms of, under the last National government in terms of improving that equity in terms of screening, but there's still a long way to go, and we do need to see people, regardless of where they live, getting the same kinds of access to treatment, no matter which DHB they're in. And
what about
that's something that will be in the new
wealth,
Cancer
Minister?
Action Plan.
What about regardless of wealth? Because that's what I was asking about. Because we seem to have a two-tier system, some people would argue, when it comes to cancer care based on wealth. You can live longer if you've got a house to sell so that you can fund your own treatment and get new drugs. Or you raise some money. Is that what we should be doing, having fundraisers for cancer treatment?
As a government, we are wanting to see a stronger public health system that's really clear and really upfront. We do want to build the public health system. That is why we put more money into the public health system last year than has been put in for a decade. It's why you're likely to see generous health funding continue under this government. It is a priority for us to make sure that health services are more accessible to everyone rather than the situation that we've inherited.
Then why is it that people are fundraising and are on Give a Little for drugs that would prolong their lives?
Well, this is where we started out. I mean, we did look into this in opposition and saw that funding really hadn't kept up with the needs of the health system. And
it still isn't, some people would argue,
That's
Minister.
Right. I absolutely agree with you, Lisa. Unfortunately, we cannot address 9 years of funding in one budget, not even in two budgets. It will be a wee while till we catch up to where we ought to be as a country, but we're determined to get there.
Will you commit to an independent review of Pharmac's funding of new drugs?
At this stage, I'm not convinced that that's necessary. Certainly, the advice I have is
why not? Given
people
the
in New
huge
Zealand
public
and overseas.
Given the huge public debate, I'm sorry to interrupt, Minister, but given the huge public debate, why not set it to rest with an independent review of how they are doing funding new drugs?
At the moment, the advice that I receive both in New Zealand and from visitors overseas is that Pharmac is delivering better value than other health systems around the world. We've got a review for
So you'll take the word of visitors from overseas?
And from New Zealand, as I said, and from New Zealand, from the advice that I receive internally as well, is that we currently have a system that delivers the best value of any like country around the world. What we've got at the moment underway is a review of the health and disability sector. We have great ambition to invest more money in health, and we need to deal with things one at a time.
And that was Health Minister David Clark. And we've had a large response to Alex Perrottet and Nick Munro's story and this issue. So here is some of your feedback. This person says super expensive cancer drugs should not be the priority of extra funding. There are many ways the same money could be spent that will give much better value for money, this person says. Large social deficits in New Zealand are amongst the poorest and most neglected sectors of our society. Our political system has a strong track record of diverting scarce tax funding away from those who are most disadvantaged. This one in that says, my response to cancer drugs will sound harsh, they say. Firstly, they say 3 years ago they were given 30 to 50% chance of lasting 5 years with prostate cancer. I may yet be lucky, but accept what happens. This is Stephen. Stephen says, we need to be responsible, and sometimes it's time to say, today is a good day to die. I've had a good go and it's time to go. He goes on to say that drugs don't seem to cure much. He says that he hopes that I do not become a vehicle for predatory drug companies if I am not lucky, he says. Another one from Ian on the other side of the picture. Ian says that he has been fighting cancer for almost 7 years. After 6 years of chemotherapy, I am faced with a situation that modern immunotherapy drugs that are funded overseas are not funded here, says Ian. He says that his cancer is not curable, but these new drugs would increase life expectancy. And Jenny and Dave have been in contact. They say their daughter died of breast cancer just over a year ago at the age of 34, leaving behind 2 small children. Only when she was so damaged by chemo were we told about the wonder drugs at $6,000 per month. She took 1 dose, they say, but her body was so damaged by chemo she did not respond. We should have access to these drugs much earlier and at a subsidised cost, say Jenny and Dave. And finally, this one from Hera, who says, regarding cancer drugs, New Zealand people need to pay more tax. Stop attacking Pharmac or doctors. It's the budget, stupid. It's up to us to pay more for the health service that we want. Thank you so much for all your feedback on that topic and many others. That's it for Checkpoint this evening. Thank you for joining us. You can catch up on all our stories online, and we'll be back again tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30 now. Fire and Emergency says fire conditions remain extreme in Tasman, where the state of emergency has been extended for a further week. And evacuees from about 200 rural properties in the district have heard they may not be able to return home for several days. At the trial of Malcolm Rewa for the murder of Susan Burdett 27 years ago, Dallas Mackay denied killing his mother and told Rewa's lawyer he was not the one on trial. And National MP Judith Collins says she's not excited by polls which show her scoring higher than her party leader. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
RNZ National, with a fresh take on the day's news at 10 every weeknight with Karen Hay.
I'm still aware that there is a fire out there, so I'm leaving the cars half-packed.
Including the latest national and international news from the RNZ News team.
6.2% moves her ahead of her leader